Hey everyone, Nick Ottinger here once again for the Xfinity series at Team Conti Sim Performance. Gonna give you guys some racing tips, some lane tips, and kind of some racing etiquette, styles that are advantageous for Bristol Motor Speedway here. So, I done a 50 lap test run here for some note purposes, so you guys can kind of be aware of it. I'm not gonna show you guys each 50 laps, I'm gonna show you guys probably each 10 lap phase and kind of dissect that with you guys. Bristol, it's a pretty fast-paced, high-banked racetrack, right? So it's really advantageous to make sure we're not overshooting our corner entries, using the bank into our advantage, whether we're having a loose condition, tight condition into our entry phases, and that's something we're going to kind of really dive into, really in being active in recognizing it and moving forward with. So um, I'm gonna leave this for about 2 to 5 laps here, so you guys can kind of just see that without me talking. Obviously, it's gonna take about a minute or so because it's Bristol. But yeah, let's go ahead and let this roll through. All right, that's just a few laps here at Bristol. Pretty high bank, fast pace, for Xfinity series. To be frank with you guys, this car is actually quicker than Gen 7 Cup car. When actual real life Cup guys are probably gonna roll up here. So again, pretty fast pace. Also kind of diagnosis with you guys. Gonna be our first true test for really any type of bank track outside of Atlanta. For having some characteristics, something that you got to rely on being technical with. So since obviously we had a new physics update to the front, geometry of this car, kind of limiting our factors and really being proactive in where we need to control our heights, stuff like that. So to dive into that a little bit, the first couple laps, as you could tell, you might have heard a little bit of splitter contact on the left front. That's going to build up in time. That splitter is going to rise, and the same thing with the rear, dynamic heights itself. That's all going to rise, obviously, with our pressure build up in our tire. So that's going to rise a little bit, whether it's a tenth of an inch, quarter tenth, you know, quarter tenth of an inch, something like that, or even basically 2/10 of an inch it could rise throughout a run. So it's a tough track to control our splitter for sure, without at least starting it at the point where it's going to graze the left edge of the splitter. So this track's dynamic, right? This is something we're going to learn through and all week when we're racing. Whether you're going to be bottom feeding, middle, or top. I would definitely say if you're running the top, it's going to be more advantageous to burn your right front, but also it's going to be able to burn your right rear tire more actively because you're having to shift away from that wall, and we'll cover that a little bit later as well. But you may have some characteristics where you're pitching to the right rear a little bit too sensitive and start just wearing that out with your turn radius for exit. So these last couple laps, obviously this 73 I ran, I want to kind of diagnose this process of turn in. As you can tell, you're turning in well before you get to the entry, right? Like you see this bend that you're following, where it starts having a safer barrier start. A lot of folks will start turning in at that point and have such a wide, sharp, and abrupt arc into this banking, relying heavily on the front suspension to load correctly with all the wheel input they have into the car, and also at the same point relying on the rear to be stable enough at that moment of change into the banking. So I'm always a driver that recommends trying to take a softer approach initially. That's a softer approach, turning off the wall, transition into your initial brake pressure, finding your peak pressure where you feel comfortable at, slowing it down, how to trail off that brake pressure, and keeping a stable, approach into any type of banking, whether it's here, Las Vegas, Dover, Atlanta Motor Speedway, the old Atlanta, Texas. Like, you want to take an easy approach to understand how to carry the best momentum you can. And this track is very dependent on not overshooting your entry. So let's kind of slow this down, talk about it here. Obviously, decelerating, having a straighter approach into this entry banking. I'm not using a lot of brake, right? Like, I'm working to a peak pressure, but opening laps, we have all the grip that we need. So you really want to get in this banking with, again, you can see I'm using some wheel input, and then I'm starting to shape more wheel input once I'm getting ready to fully compress in to the banking here. So we're not at full compression yet, right? Like, we got the front that's loading into full compression, basically how much load the car is taking down to the racetrack, and the rear is also compressing at the same time, right? So as you can tell, we'll back this up a little bit. This is just kind of diagnosing opening stages of a run, so you can kind of feel that what you need to do, and then we'll talk about more, on longevity here, on a looser variation that I have for the setup this week. But you can tell, straighter entry, just again, once I start releasing this brake pedal, I'm going to start preparing to shape more wheel input into it, right? Like, I'm completely in a rolling phase now. And loading this car as soft and precise as I can to wrap the radius that I want at the center to make sure I'm hugging right near this apron and banking transition. And when I'm getting to the throttle, it's not an instantaneous full throttle, right? So to kind of diagnose that better, to kind of convince some avenues to not worry about so much entry speed and carrying too much entry speed, to where if you're feeling you're having too much throttle instantaneously from center to exit, a lot of times that's just probably because you're overslowing that center and delaying this whole initial transfer to the throttle way later, especially top side. Like, some drivers will have throttle just instantaneous from 0 to 100% right here, and that's because they're carrying so much entry speed, right? So this is something I've always kind of told folks on how to create momentum, is recognizing where your initial momentum can start with throttle, okay? So, and that's finding the least resistance of having to modulate the throttle from your initial input all the way to your 100% moment of wide open throttle. So that's something you got to diagnose a little bit. And you can tell this is a pretty sharp banked corner that you have to keep the radius on, keep the car loaded. Use too much wheel input, you can actually point back down to the apron with all the grip we start out with, and that's not going to do anyone good, right? So you really got to kind of pinpoint where your radius, you want to keep that radius rolling to, how much throttle you want to get and utilize, and where to start opening that wheel up without having to open it up too quick and too abrupt. You can tell it's a gradual shift loading to where we start coming off of turn 2 with less banking, and we got all the grip to kind of open our exit. But again, this is solo runs, right? So you can't do that when you're racing side by side with others. It's going to be a pretty action-packed race and race week, and recognizing that situation, and by kind of helping that situation out, you would just make sure you're not wide open throttle too often, way before you know you can carry that point from 100% throttle and carry that all the way off the corner without having to lift. So I'll kind of do it a simple way. Instead of just being 100% throttle right here, if you have a car that you're battling with right on the outside here, that you're basically at their door, right? You're gonna have a tighter exit because it's gonna pinch your exit off towards opening the wheel up to wrap the exit as efficient as possible. So you got to recognize that you're gonna have to push with more wheel radius to the exit, hold maybe a tighter exit, and then opening the wheel up pretty much straight down on this lane here. So it's a tedious process, right? It's action packed, close quarters, short track, high banked, very fast speed, everything happening at once that you just kind of got to look at. So we got off turn 2 here, right? This is our, still lap 5 of our run. But you could tell if I'm in a solo run, obviously it's a slow pace here to show you case. Look how early I start turning in to adjust for my straight line into turn 3, right? Like I'm turning in well right at halfway down the backstretch, but it's not such a sharp angle to just drive and turn in to where I'm going to enter right on apron here. So much like turn 1, minimal brake, start trail braking, getting off the brake, I shape more wheel input, and I'm timing all that, simply put, timing all that to where I know I'm getting to that full compression moment where the front's going to feel the heaviest, the car's going to feel the heaviest, and you're going to feel basically the car sit down at the track, obviously. So very similar again. We have some points where I want to show you guys lap 10 and stuff like that. 1 and 2 is just very simple with what I just showed you in 3 and 4. It's nothing too different. So I want to get to our lap 15 here, kind of showcase you that turn 3 and 4 characteristic and see what the difference is that we can kind of diagnose. This is lap 15, a little bit later of a turn in off the wall. You can tell lifting point, get off the brake, shaping more wheel input at this full compression, and to keep this radius here, right? So you can tell I'm in the part throttle early. That's part throttle, right? I'm keeping that momentum. I'm making that foundation point where it needs to be, and you can see just how much I need to actually open the wheel up with the least amount of corrections as possible. This is going to get a little worse later on in the run, but that's because I'm on a looser variation. You should be able to actively save tire enough to not have such a aggressive transition with the looser variation, and that's easy to do. Like just to kind of diagnose that you want to go in the corner as hard, and you want to get to your 100% throttle moment as aggressive as I am, right? So you would stay part throttle until you know you would be starting to open your wheel up for the exit here, causing yourself to keep some tire life with not sliding the rear on exit here and just burning through the tires at a quicker pace, right? So pretty easy entry again, off the brake, part throttle. When I got the car pretty much neutral, I'm starting to work to that 100% moment, keeping it at 100% moment. So pretty free flowing track. You got to be pretty aggressive in recognizing what you need to do. Pretty easy to race the track here, but it's also pretty easy to overshoot when you're racing the track and not realize you have to be aware and in control of your car at all times. So have a pretty good amount of fall off. About 50 laps, we have about a second worth of fall off. You can kind of mitigate that fall off trend relatively easy by just not having such a quick opening few laps here. Like the first 10 laps you'll see here, I'm well into like the 8s, 14 8s, 14 9s. I carry that for 15 laps. So you'd probably back that pace off a tenth and a half. You're to have a lot more to play with, a lot more to roll. Entry speed, center, and exit momentum if you just kind of conserve that 10 to 20 lap pace. But you can tell I like the bottom feed of this track. It's just something that I've always been comfortable doing because everyone else loves using the momentum lane in the middle and top to pitch the exit. So to get better as a racer, you got to understand where others are not just driving themselves and just follow them, right? So you got to make sure you're actually getting through these corners, try different lanes, try different angles going into the corner, different soft approaches on a high line, like up here, stuff like that, and then kind of really just diving back down to the bottom at center, the mid exit for a straight exit. So you can kind of open the wheel up and maximize that momentum. So kind of roll through here. I'm pretty sure I started going up to the top around, might have been 20, 28, 30 maybe. Yeah, it's about 30 here. Give you guys a lap on the bottom here, lap 30. Showcase this to you. You guys can tell here, like I'm using a little bit more initial full pressure of range here than I did earlier in the run. That's to slow the entry down, neutralize, stabilize the car, not to have too free of a condition and carry brake all the way into my banking. So if you guys are feeling free in, that's something you guys can mitigate, ultimately with a little less overall pressure on the brake into your whole range of braking, right? Like if you had the same as that trend I do on braking distance, you would try using less overall brake for that same distance, and then picking where you're decelerating initially, and then how much you're going to trail off and where you're trailing off at. You can tell again the same as that trend. Once I get into shaping with more wheel input into the actual banking, I'm getting off this brake, so I'm not upsetting the car, overslowing it at the full compression point, and then having to work too hard to regain that momentum. Ultimately, because I get offline, I hit the track with the left front edge of the splitter, or I carry too much entry speed because I'm hitting whole splitter, or I'm just carrying too much entry speed and I have to back everything up and regain my control of the car. So this is lap 30 here. You can tell I still have part throttle issues that I need to kind of focus towards. A little loose condition off the corner, and we should be running the top side here. Very much similar to how we're running the bottom, right? On entry, we're just driving in probably a little bit further, a little bit straighter with wheel input, not having to keep this radius so tight on the bottom. Same amount of brake, getting off the brake once I load into the banking with more wheel input here as well. Just to diagnose, you're going to know some bumps right here. It's pretty heavy on the bumps, and just got to recognize not to overshoot that section. And something I kind of talked to you guys about earlier is you get to this area right here, if your car is turning really good, you might be able to straighten this exit out once you're following the radius of the corner. Here, I'm keeping a little bit part throttle to keep that momentum for a middle exit, right? So straighten the wheel up, carry all this exit momentum, similar characteristic of 3 and 4. A little loose right here, carried too much throttle initially when I turn down the hill. Pretty easy, right? Pretty fluent to run the top side. Just don't overshoot that initial response to throttle to break it free and everything like that. So give you guys my last lap here, and we'll kind of close out Bristol. This is on the very bottom. Pretty free condition I'm having right here, right? The car wants to stabilize on the right rear, but it's pretty easy to break free into the corner. Having to do some micro adjustments throttle here, so pretty good run. That's some diagnose endpoints, some characteristics that we have to focus towards. Ultimately, just be very aware on how you're actually carrying your entry momentum. Return to your throttle. Don't just jab the throttle to say, hey, you know what? Let's just try to make that momentum and cause a push loose in this car. So to verify that, you don't want to push the center of the corner and carry that push all the way to the exit of the corner, right? So this week, I will try all 3 versions that we have, benchmark, looser, and tighter. They all might have very good qualities at certain points of the run that you're comfortable with, that you're more advantageous to carry through a run. So just experiment, right? So I think it's going to be a good week for us. It's going to be a building experience for sure, right? Like this is probably the first 2 tests we're going to have as a group, as racers, to see what this physics really going to have at a short track and a high bank track. So appreciate you guys tuning in. Let's have a good week. If you guys have any questions, please reach out. Always an open book to have a conversation with you guys. So just reach out and let's have a good week. Appreciate it.